the Collinses, Dad Malcolm, Mom Simone, and their kids Octavian George, Torsten Savage, and Titan Invictus. They recently welcomed a new baby girl, Industry Americus. We wanted to give our kids strong names, Malcolm told Jenny Kleeman for The Guardian earlier this year. He has a penchant for what he calls nominative determinism. We want our kids to have a strong internal locus of control. Though the couple's thick-rimmed glasses, tradish clothing, and general waifishness may give the impression that they are organic, robust, Montessori, truth, or Brooklynite parents, the Collinses are actually the self-proclaimed poster family for the new right movement of pronatalism, a pro-birth movement emphasizing gestational motherhood in order to save the human race from going extinct. All right, here we go. The Collinses, like other pronatalists, want to have as many babies as possible. They are not, however, religious fundamentalists. In fact, they are staunchly atheist and use science and data to back their vision. Every decision made is a calculated one. The selection of their embryos for future happiness and income, the formulaic naming of their children for career success, the construction of Future Day instead of Christmas, and the metrics determining where they should live, ranging from density of Nobel laureates to levels of homelessness. Everything is calculated, sometimes and perhaps arguably often to a fault, like with their actual parenting styles, but I'm sure we'll get to that eventually. Pronatalism is of growing fascination in secular Silicon Valley tech circles. The justification is seemingly simple. The global birth rate is falling, and it is our responsibility to make up for that loss through procreative overcompensation. The UN reports that the global fertility has fallen from an average of 5 births per woman in 1950 to 2.3 in 2021. This is partially due to women's increased control over reproduction, when we can get it, but also because of a general lack of affordable housing and publicly funded childcare. You get it? A baby in this economy? Also, a very Malthusian late 20th century cultural mania about overpopulation scared many liberals and conservatives into attempts to curb birth rates, but that whole thing is another headache for another video. Let's just keep rolling with the assumption that we are hurtling towards an underpopulation crisis. Fertility is expected to fall further to 2.1 births per woman by 2050. In the United States, the birth rate is currently 1.6. In China, it is 1.2. And a study by The Lancet found that by the end of the century, 97% of the planet will fall below the necessary birth rates to sustain populations. Mega pronatalist and tech titan Elon Musk warned in 2022 that, quote, population collapse due to low birth rates is a much bigger risk to civilization than global warming. Malcolm claims there are going to be countries of old people starving to death without a robust population of young people to support the economy. Malcolm does not see immigration as the solution to this problem, and in fact, he sees the outsourcing of labor from countries with high birth rates as, quote, really horrible optics, even though he also tells Kleeman that pronatalism is really about pluralism and genetic diversity, but I digress. In order to understand how this movement engaged so many American conservative and seemingly utilitarian Silicon Valley adjacent thinkers and politicians, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance included, we need some historical context, because this new right movement is absolutely anything but new, at least in the United States. At the turn of the 20th century, industrial capitalism brought people from rural to urban areas. Children were becoming economic liabilities, not an asset of free labor for farm work. You can see my summer camp video for more about the shifting value of children during this time. The Great Urban Migration resulted in falling birth rates among white native-born Americans, from 4 per woman in 1890 to just over 2 in 1940. Coupled with rising divorce rates, many American thinkers were alarmed with the desertion of white women from fulfilling their natural roles as mothers and family managers. Even President Teddy Roosevelt was very concerned with the idea of race suicide. Social scientist Cecilia Benoit wrote that Roosevelt's view of Anglo-Saxon race superiority was closely tied to the nation's frontier as a key component in the development of the character of the kind of people who should reproduce the next generation. Though industries like petroleum refining, steel manufacturing, and electrical power emerged and expanded during the early 20th century, it was American wives responsible for the seemingly most vital industry of all, the reproduction of white children and subsequent preservation of the white race. European nations like France and Germany enacted overtly pronatalist policy in the early century to boost decreasing domestic populations, but the United States took a more implicit approach. This involved education campaigns for nostalgic modernism, family life, and, you guessed it, eugenics. First coined by British polymath Sir Francis Galton in 1883, eugenics draws directly from the work on natural selection done by his cousin Charles Darwin. Galton's ideas about good breeding resulted in popular new ideals. Cousins shouldn't marry, sorry Charles. Smart people should get together, sure, and unfit people should be sterilized. Selective breeding is not a new concept. Plato suggested it to fellow ancient Greeks in 400 BC, and nobility based on pedigree is the foundation for most monarchies to exist ever. Elites seek to optimize the potential of elites. It's not rocket science. And by the early 20th century, scholar Anita Se Chan claims that eugenics researchers in the West, anxiously facing globalization's modern advent and growing independence and abolition struggles around the world, seeded a cross-continental movement to optimize society in the image of Western elites and knowledge classes. The American eugenics movement was defined by a suite of data-driven evaluation techniques to prevent what scientists projected as the degeneration of Western nations' genetic futures. We often associate eugenics purely with Nazi Germany, but in fact, researchers in the United States had institutionalized eugenics well before the start of World War II, including but not limited to racialized immigration bans and quotas, forced sterilization of unfit populations, and widespread use of intelligence tests to sustain a segregated population of cognitive elite. The movement was heavily funded by corporate foundations like the Carnegie Institution, Rockefeller Foundation, and Harriman Railroad Fortune. Its wide-ranging network of scientists and progressive reformers actively promoted eugenics legislation. In 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the involuntary sterilization of a woman named Carrie Buck in Buck v. Bell, which declared her an imbecile and the mother of an illegitimate, feeble-minded child. Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote on behalf of the majority, "It is better for all of the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for the imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." So while eugenics supporters and reformers were attempting to quell reproduction among non-white or non-able-bodied or mentally ill populations, they were doing whatever they could to augment the preferred populations. Fitter Families for Future Firesides first appeared in 1920 at the Kansas Free Fair, and these competitions continued throughout World War II. Families were judged for their size, overall attractiveness, health, as well as the generosity, self-sacrifice, and quality of their family bonds. Other factors considered were selfishness, jealousy, suspiciousness, high-temperedness, cruelty, feeble-mindedness, don't you just love when that word shows up in history, and the appearance of alcoholism or paralysis in the family lineage. These contests were officially sponsored by the Red Cross. Winners got a free health checkup by a doctor, and all contestants receiving a B+ or higher received bronze medals with the inscription, "Yeah, I have a goodly heritage." So it's fairly evident that racism and ableism fueled the segregation or supposed protection of the well-born from the feeble-minded or the genetically degraded. But of course, the eugenics movement was completely propagated by the rubrics of academic echo chambers. The so-called objective study of science relied heavily on IQ tests, for example, as justification for hereditary intelligence. Alfred Binet's intelligence scale was initially developed to identify French children with developmental disabilities in order to get them some extra help in school. Immigration attorney and former director of DePaul's International Human Rights Law Institute, Ajitha Reddy, wrote about intelligence testing in 2008. Binet explicitly warned against dangerous and unsupportable extrapolation of his work, such as using his test to peg normal children and adults on a single linear scale of immutable intelligence. American eugenicist Henry H. Goddard had different ideas than Binet. Goddard, the father of intelligence testing in the U.S., used what Reddy considers a perversion of Binet's test, in which he ranked people into varying degrees of mental incompetence. Idiots were nonverbal, imbeciles were illiterate, and morons were high-functioning. He found morons the most dangerous because of their ability to blend into society and, of course, reproduce. Goddard found morons wherever he looked: criminals, alcoholics, prostitutes, and anyone incapable of adapting themselves to their environment and living up to the conventions of society or acting sensibly. He, of course, found no issue with the inclusion of immigrants, all immigrants, in the moron classification. People with money, power, or academic prowess were totally cool with these increasingly popular social Darwinist narratives because they justified and resumed the social order. Goddard assured a group of Princeton graduates in 1919, "How can there be a thing such as social equality with this wide range of mental capacity?" By the 1950s, intelligence testing became a routine aspect of work and school life. This included testing in recruitment for supervisory officer positions in the military, aptitude and standardized tests still used today for admission into academic institutions, and, goddammit, eligibility for the death penalty. In my opinion, IQ tests are largely a farce. Intelligence is not static, it cannot be measured precisely, and it certainly cannot be tested in completion from a single examination. It is widely agreed among modern neuroscientists that there is no one intelligence. There is also creativity, wisdom, practicality, and social sensitivity. A 2012 landmark study from the University of Western Ontario found that measuring one's intelligence quotient is highly misleading. The scientists proposed that intelligence is an emergent property of anatomically distinct cognitive systems, each of which has its own capacity. Plus, we do not live in a meritocracy. Exhibit A. In an actual meritocracy, says Reddy, poor children from the inner city would score as highly as rich suburban kids. But in our fake meritocracy, intelligence tests serve only as predictive measures of achievement, aptitude for success within the status quo, or as measures of oppression and social disadvantage. Despite the general consensus that IQ is mostly BS, modern-day pronatalists still harp on this principle to justify their ideology. Not only are they having babies for the sake of there being more babies in the world, they are having babies because they believe the world needs more babies that are like them, more babies that are intelligent and innovative. It's not about the collapse of society, it's about what philosopher Nick Bostrom calls the collapse of advanced civil society. What happens when the birth rate goes down? No. What happens when the birth rate of intellectually trained individuals goes down? So let's use a new word. Let's call this technophilic pronatalism. Of course, pronatalists like the Collinses are going to distance themselves from eugenics or racial improvement, but it is about improvement, not just numbers. Technophilic pronatalism is not about fertility. It's about the use of nanotechnology and genetic manipulation and computer science to create the ideal hyper-intelligent offspring, and as many of them as possible. It's why this movement is gaining popularity in Silicon Valley. People do trait selection all the time when they prioritize certain kinds of spouses, Simone Collins rationalizes, regarding the unregulated genetic screening they had performed to predict how their embryos would turn out. But this level of discrimination goes way beyond selecting partners or even sperm and egg donors, Kleeman argues. They are genetically screening their descendants and trying to ensure that there will be enough of them to have a real impact on the trajectory of human evolution through several generations. How is this different from eugenics, she asks. Well, Malcolm says, it's completely different. He says that eugenics is the state-sponsored selective breeding to influence dominance of valued genes in society, and claims what the Collinses are doing is using technology to give parents choices over which traits they value the most. Oh, biotechnology. You have everyone's best interests at heart, right? I mean, you're completely separate from neoliberal policy. The Human Genome Project was created to cure diabetes and cancer and prevent heart disease, and it totally wasn't packaged to be sold to legislative bodies and venture capitalists for the creation of designer drugs, right? I mean, there's no sloppiness of language or miscommunication that resulted in reductionist and determinist perception of genomic research, right? Well, here's my opinion if you weren't ready for it. I just don't think we can separate biotechnology from the state. The hereditary genetic screening market is projected to reach $81.95 billion by 2033, and the success is directly linked to a series of legislative and regulatory measures that annex biological commodities to capitalist processes of accumulation. Researcher Melinda Cooper argues that the emergence of the biotech industry is inseparable from the rise of neoliberalism as the dominant political philosophy of our time. Why? Well, because of patent law. And in an effort not to go on a terrible tangent that is not worth my time because I'm not making this video for YouTube's monetization, but because of my pure unadulterated loathing of Elon Musk, I'm going to try and keep it brief. Smarter people than me, go gentle. So in 2001, the U.S. Patent and Trade Office issued patent number 6,200,806 over a purified preparation of pluripotent human embryonic stem cells, as well as the method used to isolate it. This means that all of these human embryonic stem cells and all of the cells that derive from them are patented. Why would a science institution or lab patent their research? Well, thanks to the 1980 Bayh-Dole Act, aka the Patent and Trademark Amendments Act, federally funded research labs were not only authorized to own and patent their inventions, but were now essentially obligated to license and commercialize them. Thank you, Reaganomics. The Bayh-Dole Act effectively gave rise to a new academic personage, the scientist entrepreneur, and a new form of public-private alliance, the joint venture startup, in which academics and venture capitalists come together to commercialize the results of public research. Plus, the financial markets were being completely deregulated in the 70s, so there were plenty of funds available for this kind of uncertain high-risk investment. So in 2001, patent number 6,200,806 set the precedent not for the commodification of the potential person, but the surplus life of the immortalized human stem cell that will enter the circuits of patentable invention. So scientific invention, particularly within the biotech industry, became inseparable from capitalist accumulation, which is inseparable from the state. It's the foundation of neoliberal economic philosophy. Free market capitalism succeeds or occurs because policymakers continuously strike down social democratic reforms and implement free market policies like the Bayh-Dole Act. Lack of state involvement in the market is still backed by state involvement, but you already knew that. But among biotechnology industries, particularly those dealing with fundamental uncertainty like stem cell research or genetic screening, the future returns cannot be foretold. Their value is speculative. Biotechnologies like assisted reproductive technologies must be sustained by the possession of intellectual property rights, because the risk is just too often incalculable without them. The biotech industry must remain inseparable from capitalist accumulation in order to sustain itself. But okay, who cares? So is everything. So let's just go back to Malcolm's argument that technophilic pronatalism is based on parent choice, not state-sponsored coercion. I also want to clarify that I'm not against assisted reproductive technologies, IVF, or genetic screening, anything like that. I just think it's a completely faulty narrative that these technologies are inseparable from the state, or inseparable from the industries that have fundamentally been transformed into machines designed to profit off of our mostly innocent desires to just adequately care for children that we bring into the world. Silja Samersky talks about prenatal screening like that for Down syndrome in her book The Decision Trap. She claims that engaging with genetic technologies causes choices to become traps that prospective parents enter willingly and eagerly, hence the decision trap. Firstly, it's a choice based on insufficient information. Prenatal screening does not tell parents whether their child will have Down syndrome, just that there's an increased chance of having the genetic condition. And for epidemiologist Abby Littman, the rhetoric of choice is completely meaningless if carrying to term cannot be a real option when society does not truly accept children with disabilities or provide assistance for their nurturance. If it's a choice to screen, we must evaluate why prospective parents are screening to begin with. Because the choice to value your child based on their susceptibility to have Down syndrome not only devalues that group of people, but also effectively prevents many of their births. There's no choice in a world that incentivizes families to screen for genetic abnormalities like Down syndrome, a condition we know to vary widely in its consequence, a condition that we know many people live very healthy, happy lives while living with. Samersky qualifies that while today the gene is no longer a eugenics instrument of authoritarian population policies, it is an instrument to mobilize citizens. If we're genetically literate, if we screen our pregnancies for any sort of genetic condition or IQ or level of future income, then we can self-govern. Citizens well-versed in genetics are responsible citizens. Citizens within a geneticized society can take destiny into their own hands, either stay behind and face risk or move forward, make a choice, and be a responsible family manager. So let's talk about good citizenship. How are pronatalists supported by family policy? J.D. Vance dissed various Democrats for not having children during his Senate campaign, describing childless people as miserable at their own lives and the choices they've made. He calls the left anti-family and anti-child. So what does it mean to be pro-family and pro-child on the right? Well, it certainly does not mean federally guaranteed parental leave, it does not mean universal preschool, no access to contraception or abortion, and certainly no immigration, because that would never solve the problem brought about by a dwindling labor force, aging population, and shrinking tax base. So do the pronatalists agree? Sort of. Simone Collins just ran for Pennsylvania state government as a Republican, but she lost by 17.5%. The Collinses believe in childcare, yes, but not maternity leave, mostly because Simone has never taken any. She just takes the birthday off because of the drugs. They are notably pro-abortion because they believe that the ban gives pregnancy an image problem, so okay. And they also homeschool all of their children. But what's most interesting to me about the Collinses, and also the saddest, is their actual day-to-day parenting. Simone never even wanted children or marriage to begin with, so her and Malcolm have an agreement that Simone gets the infants until they're 18 months old, and as soon as the next baby comes, Malcolm parents them in every other aspect. Malcolm and Simone have their own offices, with AR-15s hanging on the walls for home defense, of course, but Malcolm's office doubles as a bedroom for all of the children for some reason. They've had Child Protective Services called on them, which was a big misunderstanding, and did I mention that all of the kids have iPads strapped to their necks? They are largely unsupervised throughout the interview, and when Kleeman goes to lunch with Malcolm and the kids, he hits one of them, on record, claims that they developed a parenting style based on the observations of tigers in the wild. There are a few stipulations for the pronatalist scheme to work out. First of all, childcare has got to be affordable. In the United States, we live in nuclear family setups, in which the care work, the cooking, the cleaning, it's all done within the household, usually by women, with all of our own little stuff on our own little plot and our own little lawn. Even though for millennia, people of various ethnic, religious, and cultural traditions have resided together in multi-generational and also non-blood-related extended households and communities. And between a middle-income American married couple and a tight-knit nuclear family, a child born in 2015 would cost $233,000 from birth to age 17. This does not include higher education, something the Collinses are also not planning to help their children with. This cost does also, of course, not account for the opportunity cost of the mother's time, meaning what else she might have been doing during the period that she withdraws from the labor force. And even if you can get past the astronomical barrier to entry, there's still something else that has to work out for pronatalism to pan out. Your kids have to believe in it too. Because for the Collinses, the vision is grand. The vision spans generations, but Kleeman ends her article with narrowed apprehension. Unlike the Collinses, my thoughts aren't focused on generations far into the future. I'm thinking only as far as the next one, and how Malcolm's children are going to feel about his project when they're old enough to realize what they're a part of. So I think the deal with population politics is that it's much more complicated, clearly, than having too many people on the earth or not enough. It's not about how many people we have, it's about how we take care of whatever amount of people we do have. It's about housing and healthcare and education. It's not a numbers game, it's a resource distribution game. How do we make the world a place where prospective parents want to raise a child, not just where they feel obligated to contribute to some dystopian campaign that is probably moving to Mars anyway?